It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and I'm excited to have back on the show Leila Miller to talk about how we can talk about the issue of pro-life and abortion with our children. Thanks for being here, Leila.
It's great to be here, Kyle. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, last time you were on, you were talking about your book, Made This Way, that you wrote with Trent Horn, and I remember talking to you about having these tough discussions with your kids, and you said you kind of attacked this by not necessarily confronting it, but having open conversations with your kids early, and that really kind of helped open the door to have these discussions. People can go listen to that. It was episode 545. It was really good. And I was kind of curious. You said you don't really have to address these things with your kids kind of out of the blue because you've been having these conversations since they were young. Do you ever have some of these more awkward conversations with other kids, like friends of your kids or something like that, that they find that you're the parent that has these difficult discussions and like they start asking you questions?
Occasionally I have had that. It's interesting because some of the teenagers friends of my teenage kids occasionally have wanted to learn more or know more, and their parents sometimes have been the ones to say, I want you to go talk to Mrs. Miller, because again, it kind of bespeaks the whole idea that even Catholic adults out there were a little bit nervous. We don't really know what to say, so
right.
If they peg it, there's one person that might have something to say. I do get those referrals.
Yeah.
But if that's what you're talking about, that does happen.
Well, regarding the issue of abortion and being pro-life, how do we start teaching about maybe the dignity of life to begin with before we get to the point of talking about abortion?
Right. Yeah, so the kids are great because little kids aren't a problem ever. I mean, little kids are hardwired to trust their parents. So every time we get afraid, again, I talk a lot about the fear of parents these days, but you shouldn't be afraid, especially when you have little kids. We're thinking, oh, no, the kids aren't going to like what I have to say, or they're going to reject it, or their peers are going to... No, when kids are small, they are hardwired to trust their parents. We're almost godlike to them in some ways. We have the answers. And
right.
If we project, if we project this confidence that we have a faith, we believe in what we believe in, we know how God made the world, they trust us. They're not going to think we're crazy or weird. That's the rest of the world. So we have to go with that and realize, okay, they trust us. So we start young, teaching them that every human being has dignity. Mm-hmm. Now, that is very natural for them to understand. They're not going to balk about that. That's something we all instinctively can understand. So when a parent tells that to a child, that's just a matter of justice. Yeah, every human being has dignity. God made every human being to have equal dignity, and their life is equally important and valuable and has worth. And so it doesn't matter if the person is handicapped or, there's a story in the, someone saw, a little girl saw a man who was a double amputee and came up to her dad and said, well, that man has as much dignity as anyone else on the earth. And, well, yeah, because that child had been taught that by her parents. She knew what is true instinctively, but also through the reinforcement of her parents, that everybody is worthy, everybody has value. So that part is if you can lay that foundation when they're in their younger years, it's not difficult to do. It's not rocket science, as I say.
Yeah. So regarding the issue of abortion, should we bring this up with our children or wait for them to ask?
Abortion is interesting, especially for Catholic families. A lot of Catholic families are involved in pro-life work, or maybe they support the pro-life pregnancy center. They might have a priest, during Mass, a priest might mention for an end to abortion, that type of thing. So the word is going to come up, and if they're in Catholic school or somewhere else even, the word could come up, we pray to end abortion. There's going to come a point where you're going to have to tell a small child what that word means or what that refers to. Yeah. And there are ways to finesse that when they're little so that they don't have to have it all, the full weight of it on them at that age. I feel like it's okay to bring that up to a small child if you know that he's heard the word and wants to know. He may or may not ask the question, but you could always say after a homily mentioning it or something, you could say, "Did you know what that word meant? Have you ever, are you curious about that?" And then you could open up the discussion that way. But it usually happens pretty young in Catholic families that has to be discussed.
Yeah. How would you describe an abortion for a young child?
Yeah, we say generally there's sometimes that mommies and daddies feel like they can't take care of their babies, or sadly that sometimes they don't want to have their babies that are in their tummies, and so therefore they would pay a doctor or someone else to take the baby out too soon.
Right.
And then the question would be from the child, well, what happens to the baby? What does that mean? And you'll gently say, well, honey, the baby can't live, and so the baby dies. Mm-hmm. And so you don't necessarily have to go into what actually happens to the baby and how they do these horrible things, because that's bad enough. Like what they have just heard, even in a gentle way, is bad enough. They understand that that is just purely wrong and it's evil. And, they might ask more questions. They might be bewildered. You just kind of hold their hand and say, yes, it is terrible and it's very sad. And sometimes the mommies don't understand that these are real people because they've been lied to, but we want to pray for them too, because their babies will want to see them one day. Hopefully everybody will get to heaven. So you have those kind of talks. There is a place for more explicit talk if that needs to come up. I'm not completely opposed to that either. Every parent has to make that decision.
Yeah. And I've actually had a very similar conversation with my son, probably when he was 6 or 7 is when we first met. But why? And it just launches into all of these other questions. But why that? Then why this? Because there is this natural innocence of the child that realizes that this is wrong, and you don't really have to convince a kid at that point.
Right. Children are naturally pro-life.
Right, right.
No doubt about that. They were very recently in the womb themselves, and their brothers and sisters may have been very recently in the womb, and they're certainly aware. Maybe they have more innocence and less sin, in their lives and surrounding them, to be able to see things a little more clearly when it comes to that stark reality.
And you talked about them being trusting of you as a parent and respecting what you say, is saying like, yeah, then mom and dad says this is so, then it's true. At what point does that novelty wear off, or that innocence wear off?
Well, here's something that people might not, they might be skeptical about what I'm going to say, but I will say that if you have cultivated that relationship with your kid from a young age, and you have never lied to your child, and you have always been open with your child, and you have always given them the right answer that they can, test out in the world and see, oh, yeah, people are more miserable if this happens or that happens, or they aren't going to then suddenly turn on you as teenagers. I mean, I know that's kind of the way it looks, but I haven't had that be the case, and I have 5 that are already grown and 3 more, coming up, and they still trust, because if you don't lie to them, it's like any other adult in their life or any other figure. If you're there and you're telling the truth and you actually love them and have their best interests at heart, and they know this, and which is why we talk about being a friendly parent. You can't be this, just, do it because I said. You want them to come to you, and if you've been open, there's no need for them to turn away from you later and start suddenly asking the internet or their peers. They will tend to come to you because they know they'll get a truthful answer.
Right.
So I don't think it's inevitable, I guess is what I'm saying, that, that when they turn into teenagers, they suddenly won't trust you. Now, they may want more details, and they may want more arguments and more principles and more explanations, and that's good. But they'll still hopefully come to you for those.
We're talking about abortion and having conversations about abortion and being pro-life with your children. Leila Miller wrote a whole book on this with Trent Horn called Made This Way, How to Prepare Kids to Face Today's Tough Moral Issues. All of these difficult discussions that we should be having with our children, maybe we avoid because we're uncomfortable talking about these things. This great book that is a great resource talking about how to have that conversation with young kids, with older kids, what the church teaches on all these topics. What are some of the things that you would talk about with teenagers about the abortion or pro-life topic that you would avoid with the young kids?
Right. So more of the difficult cases or more of the details of things. So, for example, they're going to hear all sorts of arguments for abortion once they get out in the world, and they're going to hear about these, dangerous back alley abortions, and that's going to, that's what's going to happen. Women are going to die, and so you have to be able to say to them the principles that underlie everything we do. Well, we don't make it legal for big people to kill little people just so that it's safer for the big people to kill the little people. I mean, that's not a principle we go by as Christians. So it's logic. We want to bring the reason into all this, or the facts, or, for example, the idea that, well, even if it's my body, my choice. Well, but is it your body? Then we go into the fact that, Well, this body is a body inside the mother's body. I mean, no woman's body has 8 limbs and 2 heads and, 50% of the time a penis, and, it just doesn't. And so that has to be someone else's body in there. So let's talk about the principle of when can we harm another person's body. The baby is exactly where the baby is supposed to be at this age and stage of human development. So then we go through the same thing. Every human being has been at that stage of human development, and that's where they're supposed to be.
Right.
So it's not like the baby's doing anything wrong. It's not like the baby's being an aggressor. So what's our responsibility as big people to take care of little people? And, kids these days, teenagers are very tuned into equality and social justice and the oppression model. They want to make sure that nobody's being oppressed. Well, this is a huge issue of oppression, big people hurting little people. An entire class of little people is unprotected against big people who want to harm them. So they can understand that. Teenagers can get that. That's why so many teenagers are pro-life, because they understand the social justice and the oppression issue involved here.
Right. What if you have a teenage son or daughter or granddaughter that is already pro-choice or maybe pro-choice in some situations? How would you suggest approaching that kind of conversation?
Well, it's the same. I mean, you would just want to ask specific questions. I like to, do the Socratic method is it ever okay, just in general, is it ever okay to target and kill an innocent human being? Is that something that could ever be okay? And most people will say, no. They think of war. We could even bring that up. You can never. It doesn't matter what your end is. It doesn't matter what your, even if you have this great cause, you cannot in war target an innocent civilian. You can't, you just can't do it. There's no way to cross that moral line. And a teenager would understand that and say, yeah, you never do that. Same thing. If you have a human being, and again, science bears this out, and you could bring in all the science. There's great resources for that. So are we ever allowed to do that for any human being? Can we target and kill an innocent human being? They'll have to say no, because if they say yes, then all a person would need to go ahead and do that is to have a good enough cause.
Right.
And as I always say, there's not a genocidal maniac or a petty thief that doesn't have a good reason in their own mind for why they're doing the sin they're doing, or why they're, everybody's got a justification for why they have to commit this particular evil. So, and they can start to philosophize. We don't teach our kids philosophy. We don't just give these basic, reasonable arguments to them and let them sit on that a little bit and think about it and make it a friendly conversation, one that doesn't have to be confrontational at all.
Yeah. Well, this is just one of the topics that you cover in the book. What are some of the other things that you talk about in Made This Way?
Oh, boy, we have the whole gamut of the sexual issues, things that are all connected to the misuse of human sexuality. So we have sex outside of marriage, same-sex marriage, divorce, contraception, reproductive technologies, modesty, pornography, transgender identity, and homosexuality. All those are covered in their own sections in the book. Very easy to read, too. I mean, it's nothing that would, nothing that would create a brain stress whatsoever.
Yeah,
it's pretty simple.
The whole idea of, this is what the church teaches, and this is how you can explain it to your kids is such a great approach, and it's such a great resource. Every family should have a copy. And you've got some great deals going on right now. So where can people get a copy of it?
Yeah, this is amazing. So this week, for the rest of this week, I think through Friday, free Kindle copies on Amazon, so free. And then on madethiswaybook.com, which is the Catholic Answers site for this book, $5 for individual copies.
Yeah. So great.
That's through the month of January.
And this is like a real, legit, solid book. This has got a lot of content to it. This isn't just like a little booklet that they're giving away.
Right.
This is a great resource. So check it out. It's Made This Way, How to Prepare Kids to Face Today's Tough Moral Issues. Thank you so much, Leila Miller, for joining us again and sharing with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kyle. Take care. God bless.